stop whatever you're doing, just for a moment, because what you're about to hear might change the way you see everything. Your birth, your suffering, your entire existence. Have you ever felt like something was missing? As if a chapter had been torn from the book of your soul, a page that once explained it all, but now only silence where memory should be. That ache in your spirit, that whisper in your dreams, that restlessness that no success, no relationship, no earthly desire has ever fully satisfied. It was never madness. It was a signal. And it turns out you were right to question everything. 12 centuries ago, a manuscript emerged, not from a monastery, not from a library, but from behind the veil of silence itself, a sacred record whispered into parchment by mystics whose names were erased so the truth could live on. It was called the Codex Anima, the Book of the Soul, written in the ancient tongue of those who remembered, in Latin, sex animi, a scripture so powerful it had to be hidden, not to protect it, but to protect the system from it, because within its pages was the unfiltered truth of what your soul went through before you were born. Not metaphor, not myth, but a cosmic itineraria, divine architecture of consciousness. Set on sacred stages, each one a gate, each one a forgotten memory buried deep inside you, like seeds waiting for the fire of remembrance. And now it returns, not through doctrine, not through religion, but through you, because if you're hearing this, then something ancient inside you is already stirring. A spark long thought extinguished is flickering back to life. The Codex was never meant for the masses. It was guarded for initiates, those who were ready not just to know the truth, but to embody it, to become it. And now, that initiate is you. But why was it hidden? Why has no one told you that your soul, before it ever touched this earth, agreed to every twist and turn of your path? That before you cried your first breath, you stood in sacred space, surrounded by beings of light, designing your life with the precision of divine intention? Because a conscious soul is impossible to control. A soul who remembers cannot be manipulated by fear, by shame, by scarcity, by illusion. That is why they burned the scrolls. That is why they silenced the prophets. That is why they told you that salvation came from outside, from men, from buildings, from rules carved in fear. But the Codex whispers a different truth, one that bypasses the mind and goes straight to the part of you that already knows. Because before you were flesh, you were fire. Before you were a name, you were a frequency. And before you forgot, you chose. And now it's time to remember. It begins not with birth, but with the call. A sound not heard with ears, but with essence. A pulse from the universal source. A sacred vibration that ripples across dimensions like a song only your soul can recognize. It doesn't command, it invites. And when you hear it, truly hear it, your entire being trembles with knowing that it's time to return, time to descend once more into the sacred spiral of incarnation. You see, you weren't forced to be here. You weren't sent as punishment. You came as a volunteer. You felt the call and you answered. Even now, it echoes within you, in the moments between thoughts, in the tear that comes from nowhere, in the déjà vu that shakes you to your core, in the moments when the world feels thin and you sense something behind the veil. Watching, waiting, whispering. That's the call. And if you feel it now, that quiet electricity behind your ribs, then your soul is already waking up. Because no one can awaken you. No teacher, no guru, no system, only you. And that remembrance begins with accepting that you are not a mistake, not a random act of biology, but a response to a cosmic invitation. You said yes. You said yes to pain, to beauty, to limitation, to love, to loss, to forgetting, so that you could remember again. You said yes to the human game, with all its mess and majesty. And in that yes was power. Power the world would rather you never remember. Because the moment you realize you chose this, everything changes. Suddenly, the betrayal becomes a teacher. The trauma becomes initiation. The heartbreak becomes alchemy. And your suffering stops being your prison and becomes your passage. So breathe deep into the bones of your being. Because this is not fantasy. This is ancient truth stirring back to the surface of your soul after 1200 years of silence. You're not hearing this by accident. You were drawn to it, magnetized not by curiosity, but by destiny, because something in you remembers, something that was never truly lost, only buried, only veiled, and veil by veil, truth is returning, not to your mind, but to your knowing. And this is only the beginning. So you answered the call, not because you had to, but because you chose to. With all the wisdom of a soul who has walked through lifetimes, you said yes to the descent. But before your soul could take the plunge into flesh, into form, into forgetting, there was a reckoning, not with judgment, not with punishment, but with clarity, because the universe is not built on shame, it is built on light, and light always seeks to understand itself. Before you were born, your soul stood in stillness, not in a courtroom, but in a temple, a sacred chamber, where time bends, where memory is not linear, but all at once. And there, you were shown everything, every word you ever spoke, every thought you ever formed, every ripple you sent into the web of creation, not as a film, but as a feeling. The life review is not observation, it is immersion. You relived it all, the kindness you offered a stranger, the cruelty you whispered when you thought no one could hear, the forgiveness you withheld, the love you gave. But here's the sacred truth. There was no condemnation, no booming voice declaring guilt, no celestial scales weighing your worth. Only you, witnessing your own becoming. You felt what others felt, not to suffer, but to understand. This is not karma as punishment. This is karma as insight. Because when the soul understands the weight of its own ripple, it doesn't seek to escape responsibility. It seeks to embody integrity. And that is the beginning of mastery. The Codex Anima describes this stage not as judgment, but as sacred empathy. It is the moment when the soul expands beyond the I and becomes the we, when you remember that everything you do is braided into the lives of others, that no action exists in isolation. You see, your soul did not come here to be perfect. It came to evolve, and evolution requires friction. It requires contrast. It requires missteps, misunderstandings, and moments of forgetting. But in that sacred review, you remembered that even your darkness had purpose. Even the moments you regret were the soil of transformation. So breathe, beloved soul. Let go of the shame you've carried like armor. It served you once. It kept you safe. But now, you are safe enough to release it. You've already faced yourself in the realm where nothing can be hidden. You've already walked through the fire of your own memory and emerged intact. Not broken, not condemned, but aware. And that awareness is liberation. You see, the life review is not just a memory from before birth. It is still happening. Every night, when you sleep, your soul reviews the day, not with the mind's judgment, but with the heart's knowing. Have you ever woken up with a strange feeling about a conversation, a moment you didn't realize mattered? That's your soul processing. This life, too, is a review. Every moment an opportunity to course correct, to choose love where you once chose fear, to speak truth where silence once reigned. You do not need to wait until death to reclaim your power. You can begin your own review now. Ask yourself, what energy am I leaving behind me? What echoes of me will ripple after I'm gone? Not as pressure, but as possibility. Because every day you write the script, your soul will one day read again. And perhaps that's why you feel so deeply. Why guilt gnaws at you long after the moment has passed. Why joy feels like a sacred homecoming. You've already seen the map. You just forgot. But forgetting was the plan. So that when you remember, it won't just be knowledge. It will be wisdom. You're not broken. You're reassembling, like a mirror cracked on purpose, so that when it is put back together, it reflects more light than before. And this is where your next truth awaits. Because once the soul has remembered who it has been, it must choose who it will become. After the call was answered, after the mirror was faced, you did not walk forward alone, because no soul walks alone into incarnation. There are others, ancient, luminous, silent watchers of the weave. They have no names you can pronounce, no faces your eyes could hold, but you know them. They are your soul kin, your cosmic council, beings who have walked with you through lifetimes woven like constellations across the heavens. Some of them you've called mother, brother, lover, enemy, teacher. But before all of that, they were light, just like you. And in that in-between space, that holy pause between lifetimes, you gathered, not in a room with chairs and candles, but in a realm where thought is sound and truth is seen like color. There at the very edge of incarnation, you met with the Council of Souls. They knew you, not your name, not your titles, but your essence, the flame of who you are beneath every lifetime. They saw the growth, the wounds, the echoes still unresolved. They did not judge. They remembered, and they loved. In that sacred council, you didn't just ask, "What do I want to do?" You asked, "What does my soul still long to become?" And so you looked, together, at your past lives, your soul threads, your unfinished melodies. Where had love been blocked? Where had courage been denied? Where had truth been silenced? Not with guilt, with curiosity, with reverence. And then, you began to design, not your fate, your blueprint, because nothing was forced. You were not handed a destiny and told to endure it. You chose. You chose your great challenges, the ones that would stretch your spirit like fire through metal. You chose your great loves, the ones that would awaken forgotten parts of you with one glance. You chose even the adversaries, the ones who would pressure your coal into diamond. And here's what no one tells you. The hardest people in your life are often the ones who loved you most before birth. Because it takes great love to play the villain in someone's awakening. It takes even greater trust to say, "I will hurt you in this life, so that you remember who you are." And they did. And you did. The council didn't just help you choose the people, they helped you choose the patterns, the recurring themes, the sacred cycles you came here to finally break. Maybe it's the cycle of silence, generations of secrets left to rot. Maybe it's the cycle of abandonment, wounds passed from parent to child, like poisoned heirlooms. Maybe it's the cycle of fear, spiritual power feared and suppressed for lifetimes. But this time, you said no more. This time, you chose to be the one who remembers, to awaken not just for yourself, but for the bloodlines behind you and the souls ahead of you. The council honored this choice. They didn't ask if you were sure. They knew you were, because this wasn't your first time. You've stood at the gate of incarnation before, but this time was different. This time, the stakes were higher. Humanity is on the edge, and only souls brave enough to remember could shift the tide. That's why you're here. That's why you're hearing this now. Because you didn't come to be small. You didn't come to play it safe. You came to rewire generations, to alchemize pain into purpose, to turn memory into mission. And the council? They are still with you. Every nudge that saved your life, every dream that wouldn't leave you alone, every time you felt like someone was guiding your hand, that was them. They never left. You don't need a seance to reach them. You don't need a temple or a ritual. You only need stillness, because their voices are not loud, they are steady. And when you ask for help, truly ask, they will answer. In synchronicity, in silence, in sudden knowing. This isn't fantasy. This is remembering. Because once you've met your council, once you've felt the weight of their love and the brilliance of your own planning, you no longer see life as random. You see the threads. You see how that heartbreak cracked your shell. You see how that betrayal forced you to speak. You see how that illness pulled you inward, back to the place where the voice of truth still whispers. This is the divine conspiracy, planned in love, crafted in light, delivered in mystery. And it was only the beginning. Because once the blueprint was designed, once the allies were chosen, the wounds agreed upon, and the cycles targeted for healing, the soul had one more sacred question to answer. What will I live for? There, in the light of the council, after all had been revealed, after you had faced your echoes, chosen your companions, and mapped your return, one question remained. The question, why? Why are you going back? Why descend again into the forgetting? Into the heaviness of matter, into a world where your light would not be welcomed, but tested? Why would an eternal soul risk being swallowed by shadow? Because something inside you burned, a longing that no universe could extinguish, the longing to become, not just to exist, but to express something that only you, in your exact form, with your exact story, could ever bring forth into the world. Your soul, vast and ancient, looked into the tapestry of time and saw the empty space that only you could fill. not as a savior, not as a saint, but as a vessel for divine purpose. The Codex Anima says this is the moment of the vow, the moment when a soul declares, "This is the essence I will carry into form. This is the gift I will awaken. This is the pattern I will heal. This is the light I will anchor into the dark." And no, your mission is not always grand. It's not always public. It's not always loud. Some souls come to heal nations. Others come to heal a mother's heart. Some come to create works that inspire millions. Others come to break ancestral chains in silence. All are sacred. You may not remember making this vow, but the signs are everywhere. It shows up in the pain that keeps repeating, in the injustice that rattles your bones, in the quiet things that make your heart swell when no one is watching. You feel it in the question that won't let you sleep. Isn't there something more? You feel it in the pull to speak truth, even when your voice trembles. You feel it when someone else's suffering feels like your own. That's not empathy alone. That's memory. Memory of your soul's contract. The purpose you signed your name to in spirit before ever taking a breath. And here is what no one told you growing up. You did not come here to find your purpose. You came to remember it, because it's not outside you. It's not waiting in a job, a city, a lober, a book. It's been inside you from the beginning, etched into your very being, hidden in your pain, coded into your dreams. That's why you felt restless in the ordinary, why success didn't feel like fulfillment, why you've had to let go of paths that others praised because they weren't yours. The world tried to teach you that purpose is a ladder, that it's something to climb, to reach, to achieve. But purpose is not a ladder. It's a flame, and you are the match. You came here not to find worth, but to remember that you are worthy by existing. You came not to be fixed, but to awaken what was never broken. You came not to compete, but to complete a circle that only your soul could draw. And yet, there is a cost. Because once you remember your mission, you can't go back to sleep. Once the veil begins to tear, once your heart recognizes its signature on that cosmic vow, you will start seeing the signs everywhere. In the timing of events, in the people who appear at the perfect moment, in the messages that echo through dreams, songs, synchronicities, you'll begin to feel a pressure, not from the world, but from within. Not anxiety, but urgency, a sacred urgency that says, now is the time, this is the life. And you'll doubt yourself. You'll think, but I'm not ready. I don't know enough. I'm not healed yet. But remember this. Your soul chose your wounds on purpose. They are not signs of weakness. They are the curriculum. Your pain is the door. Your tears are the water. Your breaking is the baptism. Because purpose isn't something you do after you're healed. It's the path that heals you. The world needs souls who remember. Not perfectly, not fully, but truly. And if you're hearing these words, you already are. You don't need permission. You are the permission. You don't need a stage. You are the message. You don't need to be understood. You came here to ignite. So take this in now, like a whisper across lifetimes. Your purpose is not waiting, it's calling. And the more you say yes to it, in the smallest choices, in the moments no one sees, the more the world around you begins to shift. Because the soul's mission is not just a destiny, it's a frequency. And once you emit it, reality has no choice but to rearrange. But before you could step into that frequency, there was still one more sacred choice to make. One that would shape every breath, every trial, every triumph. You had to choose who you would be in the world you were about to enter. The vow had been made, not in ink, not in sound, but in soul. Your mission declared, your intentions clear, your path set in frequency. But before you could leap, you had to shape the vessel. You had to choose. How would you arrive? Where? Through whom? In what body? The world teaches you that life begins at conception, that you are a product of biology, a roll of genetic dice, a spark of randomness stitched into flesh. But the Codex Anima tells a different story, a truer one. It says that you, yes, you, chose your body, your family, your birthplace, not by default, but by design. Before you ever opened your eyes, you opened the book of lineages. There, you were shown options, timelines, locations, ancestral threads, not as static facts, but as energetic pathways, each one with its own lessons, its own weight, its own sacred code. You weren't picking comfort. You were choosing catalysts, And you saw them all. You saw the poverty. You saw the illness. You saw the abandonment, the addiction, the betrayal. You saw the generational curses running like rivers through bloodlines too tired to fight anymore. And you said, yes, not out of masochism, not out of guilt, but because you saw what no one else could see, the potential to transmute. You saw that in that body, the one that might not look perfect by the world's standards, there would be power. You saw that in that family, the one fractured by trauma, buried in silence, there would be the precise environment for your awakening. You chose the womb that would carry you. You chose the voice that would soothe or silence you. You chose the DNA, the hormones, the bone structure, the skin tone, the neurological wiring, not for vanity, for mission, because this body is your sacred technology. It holds not just your spirit, but your codes, your memory, your karmic GPS. The same applies to your family. You didn't just land there. You returned to them. Souls you've known before. Souls you've danced with through centuries of becoming. Some return to help. Some return to challenge. Some return to mirror what you must transform. And Yesem came to break you, not out of hatred, out of contract, because your soul knew that sometimes it is only in the breaking that the light gets in, that sometimes the fire isn't the enemy, it's the forge. And this changes everything. You stop asking, why was I born into this? And you start asking, what am I here to transmute through this? Because when you view your life as random, you suffer twice. Once from the pain, and again from the lie that it has no meaning. But when you remember you chose this, not from ego, but from soul, you awaken something unstoppable. You begin to honor your pain, not by glorifying it, but by using it. You begin to forgive your parents, not because they earned it, but because you now understand they were part of a much greater play. And here's the most sacred truth. Those who hurt you the most may have loved you the deepest before this life began. They agreed to dim their light so that yours could awaken in contrast. That is soul-level love. Not romantic, not sentimental, but cosmic. And no, that doesn't mean you excuse the harm. It means you stop carrying it like it defines you. Because your power was never in what happened to you. It's in what your soul chose to do with it. You see, once you chose the body, the family, the name you would carry, a countdown began. One last breath before forgetting. One last remembrance before the veil. And as the council watched, as your guides held space, as the universe itself paused to witness, you stepped toward the gate. And with one last exhale of eternity, you dove into heartbeat, into skin, into matter. But before we cross that final threshold, you must understand the last veil. Because even with your mission chosen, your body selected, your soul surrounded by wisdom, there was one more sacred sacrifice to make. The most difficult of all, the forgetting. You stood at the edge of light, not as a beginner, but as an ancient, an old one, a soul that had returned many times before, each time with more clarity, more courage, more fire. You had chosen your mission. You had designed your blueprint. You had selected the body, the bloodline, the sacred struggle. And now, you stood before the veil. Not a wall, a mist, a sacred silence, a field of unknowing that guards the gate between worlds. And the most divine paradox? You chose to step through it. You chose to forget, not by force, by love. Because if you remembered everything, if you entered this life fully conscious of your divinity, your soul history, your sacred purpose, then the lessons would not take root. The transformation would be incomplete. You cannot awaken to what was never hidden. You cannot remember what was never forgotten. And so, you agreed to the great forgetting. To be born into a world that would teach you to doubt yourself, to a culture that would mock the sacred, to a system designed not to liberate, but to distract, to domesticate, to dim. You agreed to fall asleep, so that the act of waking up would be your great offering to the world. The Codex calls this stage the sacred amnesia. It is not punishment, it is not failure, it is part of the design, because the soul learns most deeply not through knowledge, but through experience. And so, when you crossed that veil, you forgot your name in the stars. You forgot the council, you forgot the contract. You forgot that every person you would meet, you had once loved. You forgot your vow. And that's why, for so long, you searched outside yourself. You looked to lovers, to teachers, to titles, to goals, to gods, trying to remember what your soul never stopped whispering. You saw others and felt something familiar. You walked into places you'd never been and wept for reasons you couldn't name. You've called it déjà vu. You've called it intuition. You've called it madness. But it was memory. Memory leaking through the seams of forgetting. Echoes from before the veil. Because the veil is not perfect. It is thin in places. It tears in dreams. It bends in silence. It weakens in grief, in awe, in love. Have you ever cried at a sunset, as if your soul knew something your mind did not? Have you ever met someone and felt home? Have you ever heard a voice in your heart that didn't sound like yours, but felt more you than anything else? That's the soul. That's the remembering, because forgetting was never forever. The Codex says this life is not a test. It's a trigger, a set of experiences designed to shake you awake, to irritate the amnesia, to call forth the divine spark that never left you, only waited beneath the surface. And that's why the world feels so strange. Why the rules never sat right with you. Why the noise of modern life makes you restless. Why you've always felt like something is missing. Because something was missing. You. Not the person, not the personality, but the presence, the sacred witness, the eternal I behind the name. And here's the beauty. The veil is not the enemy. It is the gatekeeper of the holy. Without it, we could not truly choose love. Without forgetting, we could not rediscover faith. Without doubt, there would be no courage. And that's what makes your life so profound. Every moment of remembrance is a miracle. Every flash of intuition is a breakthrough. Every time you love despite fear, speak truth despite shaking, forgive despite pain, you tear the veil, piece by piece, breath by breath, until the light starts pouring through. That's what awakening is, not an escape, a return. And the signs are everywhere. You feel it in dreams. You hear it in music. You see it in synchronicity, in repeating numbers, in the questions that haunt you. That isn't coincidence. That's your soul knocking from the inside. And you're not crazy. You're remembering. You're remembering that there is more to this life than survival, that your pain is not random, that your gifts are not accidents, that your longings are not flaws. They are breadcrumbs, leading you home. And that home is already inside you, behind the veil, beneath the fear, within the silence. So stop waiting for someone else to give you permission. You are the permission. And yes, you may forget again. That's part of the rhythm, but you will always find your way back. Because your soul designed this life with traps, but also with keys. And every time you choose love, truth, forgiveness, stillness, you find one. But now, we come to the final step. The moment everything that was prepared is set into motion. The leap of all leaps. Birth. And then, silence. Not the silence of peace, but the silence of surrender. The kind that only comes before a storm of becoming. You had answered the call. You had faced your echoes. You had chosen your mission, designed your form, stood before the veil. And now, you stood at the edge of the unthinkable. To leap, to forget, to be born. The Codex Anima calls this moment the divine descent, the final act of faith, when an eternal soul chooses to enter a world that has forgotten its own divinity on purpose. There were no words here, no bright music, only pulse, only presence, only you. And then, you jumped. You, the infinite, became the inhale, the heartbeat, the child. You, the one who spun galaxies, became small enough to be cradled in someone's trembling arms. And with that first cry, the veil sealed, not as punishment, but as a sacred agreement. You would forget, so that every step forward could be real, so that remembering could be earned through experience, not handed down like a rule. But not all was lost. You didn't carry your memories, but you carried your essence, the spark, the pulse, the whisper that would call to you through every life moment. It shows up in strange ways. In the ache when you look at the stars. In the dreams you can't explain. In the way certain people feel familiar before they even speak. You don't remember them with your mind. You remember them with your soul. Because deep within you, the Codex still lives. And though your mind may doubt, your spirit knows. You felt it, haven't you? That flicker of something beyond this world. In grief, in love, in awe. The shimmer of a truth too vast to name, but too intimate to ignore. That's not coincidence. That's you, breaking through, piece by piece, veil by veil. And if this voice, this message, this moment stirred something ancient in you, then you're remembering. You didn't just fall into this world. You chose to be here. You are not a passenger. You are the pilot, the architect, the living prayer of your own divine design. So the question is not, are you worthy of the light? The real question is, what will you do now that you remember you carry it? Because this is your moment. And if this resonated, if something inside you whispered, yes, I knew this all along, I invite you to share that knowing with others. Drop a comment below, not for attention, but for activation. Tell us, what did you feel as you listened? What have you remembered? Because your story, your truth, your flicker of awakening might be the match that lights someone else's fire. And if you're ready to continue this journey deeper, to explore more sacred transmissions like this one, make sure you like the video, subscribe to Path to the Unknown, and join this growing community of souls who are no longer afraid to question, to seek, to remember. This path doesn't end here, it opens. And so I leave you with a final question. What if birth isn't the beginning of life, but the boldest step in a much older journey? And what if everything you've been taught to fear was actually written into your life to awaken your power? Reimagine what it means to be human. Reclaim what it means to be soul. And walk forward knowing you are not lost. You are returning. You are not late. You are right on time. You are not broken. You are the spark that was never meant to fit the mold. You were never rejected. You were deployed. This is the path to the unknown. Welcome home.